Hey Gabsters, how are you Gabsters doing? Thank you so much for joining me on another video. To all my golden oldies, hello, welcome back. Thank you so much for always supporting, and to all my new subscribers, thank you so much for joining the Hey Gabster family. It is good to have you on board. Don't forget to like, comment, share or subscribe if you have enjoyed this video. And yeah, let's get into it. Today Gabsters, I'm coming to you talking about supervisors and the role of supervisors when you're doing your PhD. Supervisors are a really difficult thing to navigate in your PhD. And I think for many people, the PhD really is about 50% actual academic work, and the other 50% is like emotional work. It is like self-emotional work. It is managing other people. It is really you don't expect it to be as difficult as you think it is going to be until you're in it, and then you're just like, my gout is a good gout. Anyway, there's a joke behind that. Supervisor and supervisor relationship is probably one of the biggest parts of the PhD that very few people ever talk about, but actually usually impacts the student more than their data collection or anything that is directly related to the PhD itself. So it's a hectic one. It's a hectic one, Gabsters. Now, usually the structures in most departments, or sort of like the structure that we have at our department, is of course the Vice Chancellor of the school, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, and then you have the faculties, and then you have the schools within the faculties, and then you have the various departments within that school. And then in each department you have a head of department, and then what you normally have is you have like a postgraduate coordinator and an undergraduate coordinator. Sometimes it will be two different people, sometimes it's the same person depending how big the department is, or sometimes an academic leader. They would be either called coordinators or leaders or something to that effect. And basically what they do is basically they sort of see either the postgraduate element of the department or the undergraduate element of the department, or both. And then underneath the coordinators you would then have the various lecturers who would potentially be supervisors to the different students, and then you have the students, right? So that's how it sort of like sits. Should anything happen to the relationship between the supervisor and the student, the first person they should go to is the postgraduate coordinator, and then the postgraduate coordinator, if they're not happy with that, then they take it to the head of department, and so on and so on and so on. So basically you do have some sort of like reporting structure that you can go to, but because the relationship between a supervisor and a student is so fraught with there's like direct consequences to you actually like passing, even though there shouldn't be, there is. Because that relationship is not such a clear and dry relationship, it's usually really hard to figure out when's the time to elevate a discussion to sort of the postgraduate coordinator, and when's the time to sort of try and handle it yourself. And also most departments generally try not to shift supervisors too much, to try and get students to actually work through any issues they might have with supervisors, and vice versa, any issues supervisors might have with students. They really try to sort of keep that relationship the same and try not to like move students to different supervisors at like a drop of a hat. So it's really is a relationship that needs to be managed really carefully, and it's probably your first entry. If you haven't worked before, gone into a work environment, it's really difficult, because for the first time you probably have to take charge of a project, yet still be under a supervisor or a lecturer who might have lectured you before. So for the first time as a student, probably more so than ever in your honors or your masters, you kind of have to tell the person who is in charge, aka your supervisor, what it is that you want to do for your project. At the same time, you have to do it in such a way that you don't alienate them, and that they are still able to give input to your research, constructive input to your research. So you don't want them taking over your project, but you also don't want yourself running the project to such a degree that you're not getting any input and basically your project falls apart. So it's a really difficult situation? Well, firstly, let me start off with, where do you get your supervisor from? Supervisor is somebody that you as a student, especially for your PhD, for your honors and your masters, they're usually appointed by the academic leader or the postgraduate coordinator. But for your PhD, you go out looking for your supervisor. You could either find a supervisor yourself, like write to a school and say, any school in the world really, and do like a mini proposal and say, hey, I'd like you to please supervise me, this is what I plan on studying, and then send them that proposal, and then they say yes or they say no. Your supervisor doesn't have to come from the same university as you are maybe potentially even registered in. They don't even have to come from the same department within the university that you're registered in. Heck, they don't even have to come from the same country that you are registered in. It's a relationship that can, if managed properly, can function very easily. With the kinds of internet and communication technology that we have now, you can find it really, really, really easily. So it's not something that requires a lot of hands-on. I mean, sometimes, usually depending on what it is that you're studying, maybe it might need a little bit more hands-on physically their supervision than other subjects. But I mean, for social sciences and things like that, you really don't generally need like a hands-on supervisor. But I have a couple of questions that I've been asked, and I'm just going to address those questions. And if you have any more questions regarding the supervisor and student relationship, please put them down below and I'll try and like answer them in a vlog or something like that. So how do you address your supervisor, for instance, formally or informally? That really depends on the institution that you're coming from. Some institutions require you to enforces sort of those titles, and therefore you're expected to address your supervisor according to the titles. But some universities, some institutions, and some departments even might not have necessarily that strong entrenched title requirement. I think initially when you're first getting in contact with the supervisor, if you don't know the supervisor, I would say stick to their formal titles, and then I see how they respond. Like let's say I send an email, and this goes with anyone or anywhere. I'll send an email, and if a person is a doctor, I'll say, Dr. so-and-so, my name is so-and-so, and then they'll respond. They might respond with, hey, Ms. Lamini, and then I know, okay, stick to the doctor. Or they'll say, hey, Gabby, hi Gabby, or whatever. Then I know it's a little bit more informal, and then I might just kick it down to, hey doc, you know, or hey prof, instead of dear professor Shambalala, haha. I would say take the lead from them rather than you just going informally or informally, but always start more formally and work your way down to informally. What is the difference between the two supervisors? Now, sometimes it can happen that you have more than one supervisor. When I first started my PhD, I moved with my supervisor who had supervised me from honors and masters, and she stayed as my supervisor until post my proposal, or midway through my proposal, and then I got another supervisor who is stronger in a different area to my research. So both supervisors sort of balance each other off in terms of what I require for my research. But sometimes you can find one supervisor who's able to do everything for your research. Some people have 3 different supervisors. Now, noted, the more supervisors you have, the harder it is to manage the relationship, because you're now managing 3 other people, plus your own research, plus your own participants. So it can get really, really, really hectic versus when you have one supervisor. And most schools and most departments will try and keep the supervisors to as minimum as possible, but it really depends on your research and who you're able to find to supervise you, because if you need more than one, then do go get more than one, but try and then come up with an agreed system of working. So for instance, if I as the student email a chapter for the supervisors to read through and to give comments on, I could send that one chapter to both supervisors, and then one supervisor will read it first, send it off to the second supervisor, so that by the time it comes to me, I've already got all the corrections in one document rather than having to handle 2 different documents, because you could find that they're both actually doing the same corrections, but having to go through 2 different documents is a lot more work. So you could come up with a system like that. Or how long does it take for a supervisor to respond to me? You could actually sit down and sign a contract. I know most schools have, we have at our school, even though it's not necessarily, I've never heard anyone say that they've stuck by the contract, but it usually has rules and regulations on how to how the supervisor-supervisee relationship is supposed to work. So you can come up with when I send you something, you've got 2 weeks to respond to me, because depending on the supervisor and how busy the supervisor is, you could wait months for a response. I mean months, people. It's not uncommon to wait for months for a response on like a chapter or something like that. Again, it's a really difficult one. Like, do you come off straight off the bat and you say to the supervisor, you've just met this person, they've just agreed to be your supervisor, and you're like, okay, we now need to come up with a set of rules and guidelines to guide our relationship? Or do you first wait to see how that person works and then take it from there, so that you maybe cater the contract or the guidelines specific to sort of things that you have picked up or not? Do you wait straight off the bat and sort of like go in, or you don't? Because it's sometimes also, if you create a relationship that's very sort of like pragmatic and sort of by the books guideline, it's very hard to deal with those really gray area issues that pop up with your PhD as you do your PhD, and then you end up having like a very stiff relationship with your supervisor, versus if you sort of wait for it to evolve naturally, and then you have a more organic relationship. But it also means that you have a lot more gray areas with the supervisor, because a lot of the time also when it comes to supervisors are also the sort of the beginnings of the people who usually entrench you within the academic world. Some supervisors do this very well, and other supervisors don't do this at all for their students. So some supervisors might start developing you more professionally and want to play a more active role in sort of you entering the academic field. So when you come in with a very sort of stiff contractual thing, they might be like, oh, okay, maybe now I'm overstepping my boundaries, and I should rather step back and just stick it to a supervisor-supervisee relationship and not go further. Or some supervisors might see that as sort of like, what do you call it? Proactiveness, and might actually see that as a sign of you wanting to, showing proactiveness and therefore leadership and those kinds of things. So bring it back is to say that the supervisory relationship, supervisor-supervisory relationship, is actually a very complicated one, that you can't actually go in and say, this is what I'm going to do with the relationship, this is how I'm going to handle it. It's actually a kind of relationship that actually a lot of the time you go with your gut instinct. Now it's a big problem, because if you do have a major issue with your supervisor, if you do have a major issue with your supervisor, then you need to sort of like raise it with somebody. But the minute you raise it, what if that supervisor is not moved and still stays as your supervisor, and this is maybe your first year of your postgraduate career, and you've still got another 3 years, minimum 3 years, 4 years to be with this person. So now you've created a very antagonistic atmosphere. Sometimes it does actually break down, and sometimes you do need help to actually get out of it. You can see that your work's not coming together. You're probably in your proposal phase, and it's 3 years later, you're still doing your proposal and you haven't done anything. Then it's time to get a new supervisor. So in that case, you would go to the course coordinator. If the course coordinator is not helping, then you'd go to the head of department, potentially the head of school, and raise it as an issue. But even when you do that, you need to have practical, truthful evidence as to why you feel that this relationship needs an intervention and why you need a new supervisor to be appointed to you. If it's a last minute thing, maybe the department can help and appoint a new supervisor for you, but usually you would then have to go out and find another supervisor to replace the supervisor that you've lost, which means basically you're again starting from scratch. So you need to keep that in mind. Just because you've changed supervisors doesn't mean that the timeline requirements for the school and the university would change. You'd have to go to the faculty to let the faculty know that you're changing supervisors and might potentially require some extra time doing certain things, and then ask for extension for those kinds of things. I hope this video has been somewhat helpful when it comes to dealing with supervisor and supervisor relationships. I don't know if I answered everybody's questions. Have you ever had to wait for a supervisor? And how long have you had to wait for a supervisor to get back to you, Gabsters? Anyway, Gabsters, have a lovely rest of your week. Bye!